Okay, so in the last lecture, we were talking about erosion issues and water and wind and the problems associated with modern agriculture. Um, those are natural problems. Can't control the rain, can't control the wind, but our agricultural practices we can control, and that will definitely influence the quality and the longevity of our farm. Other issues associated with water related to agriculture is when we irrigate, we sometimes create waterlogging, basically an overabundance of watering. You can water crops too much. Too much rain, things rot. They don't do well. So that is an issue that we have to address and think about, depending on if you have irrigation available. A lot of farmers don't. They rely on the rain and hope and just keep their fingers crossed. But some folks, they may have their farm close to an aquifer where they can tap into it. It doesn't cost them anything except the electricity for the pump and then the equipment, and they will irrigate their fields. So you see that big, gigantic sprayer down there, that's irrigating the field. Increases your productivity, but overabundance is bad. The other thing that can happen from irrigation is salinization. So this is a problem that occurs when mineral salts accumulate in the soils, and this actually becomes lethal to the plants, and it to a certain extent destroys your soil. So if you over irrigate too much water, as the water evaporates, especially here in the Midwest in July and August in Illinois, evaporation occurs, and as the water evaporates, it leaves behind sodium. Sodium binds with chloride, sodium chloride, salt. So this field to the right here, this picture of this field here, this one over here, right there, all of this white stuff or kind of grayish stuff, that's actually salt accumulation from salinization. Overabundance of watering, evaporation of the water, salt's left behind, it accumulates, it bonds, and then you get more and more salt. Not good for plants. They don't like salt. So you can destroy your fields with this because you can't remove the salt. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to go and clean it up. So salinization and waterlogging are concerns if we are irrigating incorrectly and over watering our fields. So let's take a look at conventional farming. There's lots of stuff here. We're going to hit some of the highlights. Guys, get interested in this, take one of the ag courses. There's so much to learn about farming. Some people spend their entire lives studying, learning, and working with conventional agriculture. Some of it can boil, when we talk about traditional corn and beans, it can boil down to making sure your plants have the right ingredients for growth. 3 elements are key for plant growth. These are lack of these will limit plant growth. Nitrogen, we're going to look at nitrogen, we're going to look at potassium. Let me back up here. I'm drawing a little blankness here. When we talk about nutrients that are limiting for plant growth, nitrogen, so you got your N for those chemistry individuals, potassium, you have your K, and phosphate, you have your P. Right? These are the key elements that will enhance, or we could say limit, plant growth, especially in traditional agriculture. So conventional farming often has heavy inputs of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphates, so they maximize plant growth. There's also large inputs of energy to produce crops. How much energy does it take to plant the crop, to spray, to fertilize, to do all these things? So there is a massive amount of energy going into conventional farming, are we getting that return back? So as we do this, what are we losing? Think about soil quality and the soil issue that we were discussing. So what traditional or conventional farming is doing is moving away from some of the traditional stuff we did for hundreds of years and starting to do types of farming where they're focusing on soil conservation, becoming very aware of soil conservation and practices that will help maintain the longevity of the farm. So one thing that can be done, and it depends on the type of farm you have and the land and all that, you do this stuff called contour farming. So this is a picture on the right here. So notice these strips. So there's a strip of green here, there's another one here, 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 here. So contour farming or terracing, so notice this curve here. It's hard to see, but the ground actually slopes downward this way on this farm. So if you create these contours or terraces, it slows water as water runs downhill. It decreases soil loss, and it actually has value when we talk about pest management as well. So there's a lot of benefit to doing contour farming if you have that type of land. If you're flat and black, just flat ground, you don't need to worry about contour because you don't have the same type of runoff of water or erosion issues. So if you have flatter ground, you may consider using what we call cover crops. So that's this picture down here. So the brown stuff here, this is all corn stubble. So the corn was harvested October, November, whenever they took the corn out. And instead of that being bare dirt, so think about this picture here, this is the bare dirt in between the rows that would remain after the harvest. Instead of bare dirt in here, the farmer has planted a cover crop. Just depends on where you're at, depends on the farm, depends on a lot of factors. But cover crops, let me put a text box here. Cover crops are often things like rye, alfalfa, or clover. Okay, so you put that cover crop in and it holds your soil in place during the winter. And then next spring, when we get those big spring rains, your cover crop is holding your soil in place. It's a smart thing to do. It's a good thing to do for longevity. Challenges, there's cost associated with putting a cover crop in. So you got to have the fuel to drive the tractor. You have to have the seed to put the cover crop down. And then in the spring, you need to use usually herbicides to kill off the cover crop to then plant your beans or your corn. Unless you then adopt the practice of no-till farming. So now this may require different farm equipment than your traditional, what you've been using. And so no-till is down here. Notice the standing crop, the stubble. Okay, all this stubble in this field kept the field from eroding during the winter, the snow melt, and the spring rains. But now it's springtime to plant, and the farmer goes in and he uses a drill. That's the name for that piece of equipment that actually punches a hole in the ground and puts the seed in the hole. Punches another hole so many inches apart, puts the seed in the hole. So different piece of equipment that can do what they call no-till farming. So instead of going in, tilling up everything, ripping all the soil up, and exposing it for erosion, you now get into this no-till and you retain more of your soil. So there's lots and lots of things the agricultural community is aware of and saying we need to make changes for the long-term future of the agricultural industry. And a lot of people are very, very receptive to it. They're driving the changes. They're exploring new varieties, new things that can be done, because a lot of farmers do care about the land and they're looking at long-term health of their farm. They destroy their farm, they're out of business, or they're not going to be able to hand it down to their children, or they're not going to be able to sell it when they retire or when they die, or etc. it's not going to have the value they want it to have. So there's a lot of people that are concerned about it and making all the steps possible to preserve it. Unfortunately, there are also those out there that don't care about it. I want to maximize my profit. That's all I care about is the money. And they'll destroy the land and then try to move on to another piece of land. So sometimes you get into what's called tenant farming, basically a renter. And sometimes the renters don't care about long term. I just want to maximize my profit for as long as I can. And then maybe I'll do something else or I'll move to a different piece of ground in the future. So we have to sort that out when we're having those conversations with people in the agricultural community. All right, so we got our soil, hopefully, soil erosion issue identified and I don't want to say controlled, but recognized, and we have methods to work with soil conservation. Now we need to look at other issues associated with farming and other challenges to the agricultural world. And this gets into the pests and then the pesticides and things we do to try to get rid of those pests. So biological pests are organisms that eat agricultural crops. So you look at our picture here. I hate those Japanese beetles. Oh, invasive species, got here unintentionally. They just love corn. As soon as it's starting to tassel out and your ear is starting to form, you're going to get this big, beautiful ear of sweet corn. Sometimes the Japanese beetles just jump all over it and devastate it. So there goes your sweet corn. There goes your field corn. There goes your revenue or dinner, etc. So we look at ways that we can fight these suckers, and that often brings into the picture pesticides. Chemicals that will kill biological pests. So pesticide is a broad term for something that will kill pests. Now, we have pesticides that are used to kill all sorts of agricultural pests. Let me add to this biological pest. They're often organisms that eat agricultural crops or compete with a crop for nutrients and space, territory, habitat, land, whatever. Weeds are an issue as well. All right, so we have to keep those guys in mind. And then what do we do to get rid of weeds along with things we do to get rid of what we would think of as animal-based pests? So, all right, so there is a whole spectrum of different types of chemicals out there that we can use. Again, broad category, we say pesticides, but what we want to figure out is what is the difference between the varieties or variations out there. Right? So here's one type, organophosphates. This is one of the most widely or abundantly used synthetic pesticides. So this is organophosphates is what we would call a class of pesticides, a grouping. Roundup is probably the most common one in this grouping. So let's underline that. So Roundup, that's the trade name. If you go to Lowe's or Menards or Ace or anywhere, you can buy a gallon of Roundup. This is an herbicide. So what this means is this is used to kill plants. So herbicides will kill plants. So when I'm spraying Roundup, I'm trying to kill weeds. Very, very effective, works really well, but there are some significant concerns associated with Roundup. One of the big concerns is the health risks it can pose to people. A lot of research looking at, does it have a connection to cancer? Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, leukemia, etc. There's a lot of concerns about that. In the next lecture part, we're going to talk a little bit more about Roundup and take a look at some of the issues with it.